This is Burn This Book, a banned books book club where we, Nicole and Eden, read a banned or challenged book twice a month and discuss its meaning, impact, and censorship to make it more accessible for all readers. This week's book is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, which was published in 1970. And joining us today is Camille Price, calling in from Richmond, Virginia. Camille, hello. Tell us about yourself and your connection to this book.
Well, I am not an English teacher or anything like that, but I love reading. And I was introduced to Toni Morrison in high school reading Beloved. And it was shortly after reading Beloved that it was actually challenged in my high school. And it just made me love Toni Morrison all the more as I pondered her role in literature and in my life. And so the news stations came. There's just a lot of activity around this. And I previously didn't know that people banned books at all. Like I had heard of that in other countries, other eras, but I was like, this is still a thing. So it just opened my eyes to this reality that we are still fighting to not ban books in our schools. And that's where my love of Toni Morrison came and my passion for all of her literature from Beloved and The Bluest Eye.
Camille is my sister.
Yeah.
So she's also the inspiration of why this podcast was even created, is because of Camille's example as my older sister. She's 5 years older than me, and I saw her. I was a kid, and I was like, that is the coolest thing. And it was like she completely opened my eyes to local activism, what you can do in your own community as a teenager. It was wild, and it specifically was centered on this book, Bluest Eye.
You said you had a news clipping, Camille?
I do have.
Can we read that now?
Do you want me to pull this up?
Yeah.
It was the
and
only
how
thing
old
that used
were you?
to come up when I'd Google my name. What?
Oh.
What year was that? Let's see. 9 News. It's a big news channel in Colorado. Yeah. 9 News. Students protest the banning of a book. The parent complaint was regarding The Bluest Eye. Different classes or different grades had been reading different Toni Morrison. I remember I was in Kathy Crape's Heritage High School English class, and she was just the most remarkable teacher that inspired me in so many regards. But due to some of the things in the book, one parent in particular, I guess, started this whole process. The board felt, so this is what they said. They said the board felt that the students in the K-12 setting may not have the maturity necessary to really read that book. Students are hoping the board will reconsider to say they're concerned about setting a bad precedent. Once one book is banned, another one gets banned, said Camille Corin. At the time, I was a senior at Heritage High School. And then I had classmates that also were quoted, and they called us. And then I also went on to say, without that environment, where are we going to rely? On MTV, I just don't think that's a very good place to go once we've banned a book talking about how this is an appropriate place to discuss hard topics. Because that was kind of the issue. It was like, these kids aren't mature enough. We're not going to discuss these things. In particular with this book, a lot of rape and just different things. And their excuse of us not being mature, I think as a senior in high school, that really hit me, because I'm like, oh, we are the most mature of all people, right? And of course that wasn't the case, but looking back on it, it just kind of opened my mind to the fact that they were trying to dictate where a good place for us to learn these things was. Yeah. And I just didn't feel like there was a good place, especially for a lot of the kids in my class. We had a high school that was very mixed economically. There were kids that didn't have parents that were going to be talking about these things. There were kids who were probably dealing with these things. The fact that one parent felt like it wasn't appropriate just made me sad, because that would just be harming those children that actually needed a place to talk about it appropriately with such a wonderful teacher that we had in a safe environment with peers. It sparked my mind as to like, whoa, what is this? What is this control that people can have over what we learn and how we learn, and who gets to actually have the say? So that's why I'm very passionate about the topic of banning books. I haven't really come across anything that I feel is damaging enough that it should be completely removed or censored in that complete extreme way.
Yeah.
And interesting that parent or the board lumped in K through 12, because obviously this is not a book that would be read in the K setting.
No.
If you were outside of a senior advanced English class, I don't think that it would have been read
exactly.
at all.
This was an AP literature class, right? This is for students who have proven their interest in this topic, have proven their maturity and their comprehension. Like, this isn't just something we're throwing about casually, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Something I remember from that time too is when adults who were like friends or peers of my parents would be like, "We saw your daughter on the news today," because I think you were also on the news. Because was there a sit-in at the high
We did do
school?
a sit-in at our high school. Yeah, we did.
Amazing.
We were determined to vocalize our opposition to these boards and parents without hearing our voices. I was like, we're the ones impacted by this. So yeah, we did a sit-in. We called radio stations. People called us for interviews and quotes.
Yeah.
Like, we did a lot to just make it known that we weren't comfortable with them dictating what was appropriate for us.
I think that so many more students can do this stuff. I remember that these parents and peers of my parents would come up to them and they'd be like, "Yeah, we saw Camille." And they didn't really, because you could tell that they didn't know what to think of it. And they would respond and be like, "Yeah, it was really interesting." And my parents would be like, "Yeah, isn't that amazing?" And these peers of my parents were like, "It was really interesting." And that was it. And it was really fascinating to see how the adults reacted to this situation. And how they'd never really questioned it. Not all the adults, but these adults that had approached my parents, they would have been fine with the book being banned. And also, like, they didn't really know how to respond to seeing their friend's daughter stand up to this. And I just feel like it was an interesting role reversal of like, yeah, they did not know how to deal with it. And
Well,
I remember watching that and being like, Camille's cool. Like, it's like she doesn't care what these parents think. She doesn't care what these random adults think who just happen to be our parents' friends. Like, she's going to do it because she believes it. And it was very inspiring for me as a younger sister. Because this was what, like 2006, 2007?
2006. But I mean, we were
2006, yeah.
blessed to have parents that not only encouraged our voices, but supported our voices, even if they disagreed. I think that's a pattern in their raising of us. It was very much a lot of the decisions I made looking back, I'm sure they questioned, but they supported it because at the time they knew that I was doing the best I could. I was vocalizing what I felt at that time. And so I think most people did view it as a parent issue. It wasn't a student issue, it was parent issue and the parents' issue of them protecting their kids. I don't think any banned book conversation is ever really focused on what the students want or what have they gained from this. Because that was something I really was frustrated by is I gained so much from that reading. And it changed the trajectory of my life, what I wanted to do, how I viewed the world around me. And I don't think that was ever open for discussion. It was like, no, we're protecting you. That was a frustration. So I'm grateful for parents that did encourage that. But I don't know if enough people do include kids' voices into the conversation, especially the kids that are mature. I mean, K through 5, that's a little different. But high school students, I think that's a place where there should be a much more open conversation.
Yeah. That's so interesting. The centering. I don't think we've talked about that ever before on this podcast, Eden, about centering the students' voices over the parents' voices. We've really centered parents, which is a very fascinating reframing of this whole issue, which makes total sense.
Like, even like the political rhetoric around public education and wanting to quote unquote put education back in parents' hands. I feel like I don't think there, like, to my knowledge, has education ever been in parents' hands? Like, is that something that parents who just want more control are citing as like a platform?
Like they want it returned back. Yeah, I feel like that's kind of the rhetoric of a lot of those kind of issues, like making, not to point to Trump, but like making America great again. We keep saying that there was an era where it had total control over, and that the education system was in line with every single parent, apparently at one point. And that's never been true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Or maybe the rhetoric is just that education has never been in parents' hands, and like now politicians want to help parents take public education.
Yeah, maybe.
I think it's a fear-based thing. Whereas I look at my grandparents, I don't know if they even knew if my dad or his brother went to school. Like, and honestly, like if they missed a couple of days, like I don't know if they really would have known.
Yeah.
That wasn't their priority. Their priority was working and making sure there was food on the table. And now we have luxury of time and information where we are so involved. We have heightened awareness of everything that's going on. And we're like, I didn't get the daily report from your teacher. What did you eat today at lunch? Like, I didn't know I could look up my child's what they ate. what they
Yeah.
ordered from like the menu at their school. And I was like, I don't care to know
Whoa.
that. Like, hopefully they can make their own decisions.
Yeah.
We have a lot more access. And I think it gives us a false sense of power and control, which likely isn't beneficial, as we aren't the experts. I mean, I
Yeah.
have
Mhm.
a graduate degree in a form of education, but it's not my kids' education. I
Yeah.
have a graduate degree in refugee education and policy development. That's not going to help my kids. So it's silly for me to
Yeah.
assume that I should be in control of something that I honestly don't know the development of my 6-year-old. Like, that's an interesting thing that we feel like we should be in control. And I don't think anyone's really qualified outside of those schools.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
but I do feel like parents should have a say. Yes, I do think that's great.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
But with a lot of conversation and discussion and just, I feel like inclusion of the teachers, the students, and the
Yeah.
parents all together to see what is the concern and what is the risk of banning something. Because I think that's a
Yeah.
real thing. I reread the book Bluest just a couple weeks ago. And as I was listening to it, I was thinking about all of my classmates that I was with that year that we read it. And we had read Beloved, we'd read the Bluest. Like, my teacher was just fabulous, and she really helped us want to see the world. And she gave us this desire to understand people that didn't live like us. And our school had a large affluent population, but it also had a lot of kids that weren't.
Yeah.
And as I sat there, I thought, wow, a lot of my classmates went on to do missionary work in other countries. Some of them are now like youth pastors and things. A lot are social workers. A lot work in the medical field in different areas.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking, what a great training ground for them
Mm.
in high school to learn that the world is not the world that they currently lived in. To see that there are family situations, like in this book, that are abusive and horrible. And as a social worker, they didn't go to college just thinking like, oh, this is great. They
Yeah.
had this glimpse of like somebody else's real context. And I think that's the beauty of Toni Morrison, is she gives you this insight to real people and you feel connected to each character.
Yeah.
And there's not a good or a bad, but an understanding of like, wow, this is a systemic issue. And this is something that's often hidden or something that's misunderstood. And yet you're seeing it and you're thinking, is it uncomfortable? Yes, it's extremely uncomfortable, but it's real. And we
Yeah.
need to accept the fact that this is a real reality for so many people. And I look at my classmates, I'm like, what a benefit to them that they left high school not thinking that their world was the entire world.
Mhm.
Their world was now expanded to the reality that there were people that were struggling around them, and they were more prepared for these different careers and paths they took in life. So I just think Toni Morrison is an expert at giving you a really horrible situation, but helping you see it in a very real, touching, human way. And that's something I really appreciated about this book and about Toni Morrison in general. And I think that's the benefit of so many books that are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because being uncomfortable, I think, is something we're scared of. And
Mhm.
parents especially. Oh, I don't want my kid to feel a certain way in a classroom. I'm like, why not? Why don't we want your kid to question things in a classroom?
Mhm.
Question their role in this world, question their privilege, question all that. Like, I think that is the place they should be questioning it as they sit with peers that may say, yeah, my father is not
Yeah.
with us anymore, but he was abusive. We had kids in that class that had a lot of addictions, and we had some very severe things happen in that school. I mean, Nicole knows suicide was not an uncommon thing. There were real struggles and problems that I think if we are scared of being uncomfortable, we would never actually be able to deal with. And so I just think we need to stop looking at books that are hard and uncomfortable as bad,
Yeah.
but as great resources for preparing us for a world that is extremely uncomfortable and hard. If they can be used as tools, I think they're just the greatest thing we can use. I don't think there's any other way to prepare somebody to learn about the real life situation that these social workers are going to walk into than reading a book like Beloved or The Bluest by Toni Morrison.
And the Bluest was not banned because of your efforts. Correct?
Yeah.
So it stayed in the libraries at the schools because of the efforts of the students. That banning did not happen, which is like incredible. And you touched on so many things, Camille, that I want to get into. Let's do the summary real quick, Eden.
Sorry. Yes.
No, don't apologize. Don't apologize. You said such amazing things. Eden, did you have something else you wanted to share before we do the summary?
No.
We're good. Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, cool. Okay, so summary is we are in Lorain, Ohio. This is Depression era. So we have veterans from World War I that are in this book. But The story is about a little girl named Piccola, and her last name is Breedlove, and it kind of centers her family. They live in poverty. The father is abusive in every single way, and Piccola ends up staying with another family for a while because she was taken away from the home due to abuse and lack of food and things like that. She eventually gets impregnated by her own father, and it drives her into madness. So the book is broken down in 4 seasons. And so we kind of follow Piccola during this time. A big theme of this book is her desire to have blue eyes. There's a lot of self-hatred for her color of her skin, for her eyes, for everything. And she goes to the movies. A lot of the characters in the book go to the movie theater. At one point, Piccola's mother tries to do her hair like Hedy Lamarr, who was one of the classic movie bombshells. It just goes in and talks about Shirley Temple being this ideal beauty for a child, and especially for a Black child. And Piccola just wants to have blue eyes so badly. And there's various narrators. At one point, there's these narrators of these 2 girls, Frida and Claudia, and they are friends of Piccola's and kind of just watching Piccola during this experience. Piccola ends up living with them for a time, but they point out, they're like, it'd be so silly if she had blue eyes. She'd look so odd. So they kind of act as us, the reader, in that they like acknowledge how bizarre it is and ludicrous, but also they understand that self-hatred, the feeling of ugliness that's brought on by the media. So they just point out all these different families in Lorain, Ohio. And the way that it's written is really unique because instead of just going in like straight chronological order, within each season, Toni Morrison introduces a new character like a prostitute who is in the book. And then she'll go into the backstory of that prostitute and then bring it back into the plot. And she'll go into Piccola's mother and go into the entire backstory of Piccola's mother and then bring it back to the plot and do the same thing with her father. She does that with almost every single character in this book, even characters that I was like, that's going to be a tertiary character. The owner of the cat, I don't remember what her last name is, but she even went into her backstory to give us where she is and how she could dismiss little Piccola so quickly when they have this very uncomfortable run-in at her house. But you know everything about her, even though she's only in the plot for like maybe a page, realistically, because that's what Toni Morrison does. And Camille said that so eloquently, that she gives you the entire background, humanizes each character, even though we're watching this character do an atrocious thing. She humanizes them and shows how the systemic reasons why this person has been dehumanized to the point where they can treat another person this way. And she forces us to reckon with so many parts of American history and just human history. And it's like one of the hardest books I've ever read. Honestly, it's really hard. So much abuse, so much pain, so much sadness, but it's like the prose is so beautiful. It's a perfect book. I don't know if I'll ever read it again. It's so painful, but it's a perfect book. You walk away being like, whoa, that changed me a little bit.
I think that's
not
the
looking
hope.
at the world the same way.
We want to be changed. There's no villain in this book. There's a lot of sad stories and there's a lot of sad outcomes, but I don't feel like there's a villain. And I think in other books, it'd be easy to pick one person as the evil individual. Is her father a man of any moral foundation? No. Is he a good man? No. Is he just purely evil without any understanding? I just think this helps us understand that people are so complex. Piccola's dad is a very complex character in a time in history that was very hard. And I think to explore the complexity of mankind is so hard in literature, and it's easier not to.
Yeah.
It's easier to just have a good and a bad guy and move on and think, oh, good always wins. It's like, that's not the case. Good sometimes doesn't win. And it's been interesting in my own life. Toni Morrison has given me, sorry, I know this isn't about Beloved, but it's about Toni Morrison.
No, go ahead.
Yeah,
you're fine.
We're Toni Morrison, low-key Toni Morrison fan club.
I love Toni Morrison. I respect Toni Morrison. And she's given me a lot of I don't know, of roots, I kind of think is the only way to say it. When I look at the world, I'm not as startled or as shattered when something bad happens was I'm like, this is life. She's given me this understanding that life is hard. That doesn't mean it's bad. In her writing, it's such a beautiful form. And the words she uses, the prose, they're beautiful, they're eloquent. And yet life is so disgusting and dirty that it's just this beautiful contradiction of both, that you can have both. The circumstances can be really hard, but there's beauty in that sometimes if we want to find it. And so in Beloved, it's a story of a child that died. And having had 2 of my own children die, I've thought back to Toni Morrison and reading Beloved multiple times, and how grateful I was as a youth to have read a work that was touching on the grief of death. Because we don't in that age. And it's funny that, I mean, I am now, I am 20 years removed from reading that book. And yet it's still something that when I'm grieving or I think about this, I don't feel as alone because other people have had children die. And yes, I know that other people have had children die, but to read it, to feel that and to think, this is not a common mortal experience, but this is an experience that many people have had. And I'm grateful for that. I am grateful that I can look to her literature and think, oh, I'm not a 1 in a million. This happens and it's horrible. And how do you proceed? And I think for people in situations where their family life is not good, which I'm sad to say, it's probably more common than anyone would like to admit, right? For a child with an abusive home, to be able to read about Kola and her yearnings to not be in her home anymore, that must give somebody a lot of just comfort in knowing that they're not alone. That there's other people that have had a hard situation. And even her yearning to have blue eyes, I just remember thinking, I'll never fit in here. Like, I am not, my teeth aren't that straight line. Like, I'm not tall, I'm not blonde, I'm not tan, I'm not any of those things that seem to be desirable traits. But to feel like, oh, it's okay to have that desire for a moment, but to honor it and recognize it and say, but I'm not going to have that. That's not going to work for me. And to try to find that beauty in myself, because I read about Picola and I'm like, yeah, but why did she want, like, I can see her beauty. Why did she want those blue eyes? Why do I want these things? Should I want those things? I just think Toni Morrison gives us an opportunity to really ponder our own place in this world and our own tragedies. I am grateful to Toni Morrison. I think she has given me a foundation of understanding how great and vast life's experiences can be and are for so many people, that even if I never experience it, I hope that I have a little bit more understanding or desire to just accept and understand the uniqueness of everyone's experience.
Yeah.
She does such an incredible job of just shining a light on the whole spectrum of the human experience, where, like you said earlier, there is no villain in this book. There's a lot of hurt people doing bad things, but like, I think she gives people the ability to see beyond their cover, to be able to not be so rigid in their thinking and so black and white and allow the human complexity. I was talking to someone once who could not fathom or believe that Martin Luther King Jr. might have cheated on his wife because he's a good man, so he could not have been able to do this. But to allow that complexity, like, sure, that does muddy the waters a bit on Martin Luther King Jr., but that doesn't undermine what he stood for.
His contribution.
And even it helps us learn how to not throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
But isn't that such a nuanced thing that we're still all trying to learn? I mean, we live in Richmond, Virginia, which has this beautiful avenue called Monument Avenue. And they took down all of the monuments. And in my personal opinion, yes, a lot of those monuments needed to come down. Civil War monuments. Like, there were some things that were not representing things that I think we should be proud of. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, let's just have these conversations. Let's have these open discussions. And coming from the standpoint of a parent with my children at all ages, let's have these open conversations, these nuanced discussions about a man's contribution versus a man's character. versus a man's history. How many remarkable people, even if you want to go religiously, looking in scripture, how many people in the Bible had horrible pasts that then go on and do great things and follow redemption stories are kind of big theme. I think we should look at that, or even just forgiveness stories. Like there's so much to it that I think if we are willing to have the uncomfortable conversations, but I mean, once again, why are we banning books? Because we're uncomfortable. I think if we become comfortable with being uncomfortable, we can get so much more for our children, for them in their preparation for this world. That currently this world's not an easy place. It's never been an easy place to live, but it's not going to get easier. And I think the more we can find that peace with being uncomfortable, the more we can grow and we can better prepare our kids to be remarkable leaders and contributors to a society that's a hard place to live in.
Yeah. And I want to piggyback on what both of you said, because I do think like that's the thing about Toni Morrison. The discomfort piece is so funny. We don't want to have Martin Luther King be imperfect. We want everyone to be perfect. It's very interesting. But yeah, so Toni, I think something to also note is like, we've got these layers in this book of like, there's a universality of the human existence that Camille, Eden, me, all of us with different experiences and backgrounds can totally see ourselves in this book. And then Toni Morrison does this brilliant thing where she takes it a step further and goes into the details of the American history. And she doesn't you guys were right, there is no villain per se, but there is a villain, it's just not a person, and it's American racism.
Yeah.
It's not a human being. She's not saying like this person, we're going to put all of it on there. So then when that person dies, it's just clean. It's just taken care of. That person's responsible. It's resolved. And I think that when you do that, it's a lazy way of writing or explaining this nuance that we're talking about also, because it is messy. And she explains that so well with like the reason why the dad was so evil, why he acted so wickedly. I'm using religious language now because we're talking about scripture, but why he was so immoral and abusive was because there was a really formative experience where these white racist men found him in the woods while he was having his first sexual experience, and they completely dehumanized him. And ever since then, like his relationship with sex was very, very complicated and got really out of control and violent, and ended up being thrown out onto his daughter in a horrible way. But that dehumanization was rooted in our history and in our levels and our systems of blatant racism. And if we look at movies made even before 2010, we see that Hollywood has always just done its best to make Black people a foil to the beauty of that white person. And Camille, you explained this. So I want to like highlight this. That ideal of the tall, blonde, perfect teeth is the ideal that is brought about by white supremacy, and it harms everyone. It doesn't just harm those who are not white. It harms everyone. As a white woman, I'm never going to be that. It's impossible unless I have surgery and spend but I will never be that. None of us will ever achieve these ideals that are set up in white supremacy. I just loved that you pointed that out, because Toni Morrison goes in and explains that. And what was interesting was when this book came out initially, people were really upset because it was published in 1970 at the height of the Black Power movement. And all the books that were coming out were like, Black is beautiful. All these books about like, being powerful and that my skin is beautiful and I am a queen and I am a king and I come from leaders of Africa, like lots of really positive messaging. And Toni Morrison's book, this was her very first book. It was received terribly by the Black community because they felt like it was undermining that message, even though it was simply giving a commentary on what's been happening. And it was adding nuance to that. It was saying not only has white culture or just predominant American society told us that we're ugly, but also our own people are now doing that by saying you're too dark or you're too light. She goes into even that level of this book. I think that's the brilliance. That's what makes an incredible writer. You can be writing to a specific population, But everyone outside of that population can still identify and see themselves because you're still hitting on those human pieces. Because Toni Morrison's books are always rooted in social activism. That's one of her main goals, is to talk about American history and racism. But what makes her an incredible writer is that not only does she do that, but she does that while also inviting all of us in to figure out what things we want to look at about ourselves, how we identify with these characters too, how we all see each other as human. Yeah.
I'll never understand what it's like to not be white. And it's okay for me to accept that. I'll never understand that.
Yeah,
but
it's
by reading her book,
yeah,
if anything, we should acknowledge that I can't understand it. I'm not going to pretend I can read these kind of books and I can hear about Picola's just yearning to be different. And I can have a little bit of space in my heart for this. And I can relate in ways, but I can also say, wow, how hard, how painful. I'm so grateful to have heard that in such a profound way, written so eloquently that I can understand it and feel it. I recently read a book, a very popular book, and it was all about this woman who's going through a lot of stuff. And it was good, but it lacked that emotional insight.
Yeah.
I walked away thinking like, oh, she went through some stuff. She overcame some stuff. Good for her. Toni Morrison dives into a way where you are feeling what these people are feeling. Yeah. And you are just hurting for them. You're aching for them. And you're like, oh, my heart is just broken with you.
Yeah.
And that's not easy to do as a writer. That's so hard. And yet with her, I now can look at people struggling and I can say, oh, my heart is hurting with you. Am I ever going to understand what it's like to live in your shoes? No, I can't. No one can. We can only understand the life we live. And even that's kind of complicated, but we can never understand the experience of an immigrant, a refugee, the experience of somebody that's a minority that has been discriminated for years. I'll never get that. And that's okay. As long as I'm able to accept that I won't get it. And I'm still willing to hurt with them. I'm still willing to feel with them, beside them. I can't tell them how they're feeling. I don't know. But I'm willing to hurt with them. And I think reading Picola, like, I mean, as a mother and as a woman, you just want to grab her and you want to take her out of there. You want to protect her. You want to save her. And I think she pushes us to a really interesting place to say, like, how do we interact with these characters? How do we find our place in these stories? Because they are uncomfortable. And I think the more we can be uncomfortable in our own worlds, the more we can do in our communities to build community, that sense of love and just open vulnerabilities and saying, we're here together. It's okay. These things are going to happen. We can't prevent everything, but let's actually find our place with one another in this world. And I think that's what Toni Morrison does when she shares these deep insights that are so beautifully written. She shows us the reasons we should love everyone. And I think that's what I love is the evil is our inability to love others. The evil and the villain is our judgments, our discrimination, our bigotry, all of that. That's the evil. The beauty and the good is, how do we then view these people? Because how many people in this story look at Picola as just second class, filthy, unkept? You look at
that's
that
how
and you're
the
like,
town looked at her at the end.
Even the girls are kind of mean to her and they're just like, oh, Picola, like that's, like we want to, and I'm just thinking, no, like bring them in. And I'm thinking as a high school teacher in a school that had a very mixed socioeconomic student base, what a tool to teach and say, wow, we don't know what someone's going through. We don't. And we might never know, but what can we do? And I think what a resource this can be when used appropriately. It's just, there's nothing like it.
Yeah, 100%.
And how ironic that this book is being banned in hopes of like protecting children, but this is teaching us what you're saying, like ways we can protect children, and that is to love them and to accept them and to not impose any self-hatred that we're feeling on them. The lessons I'm learning as an adult is like, be wary of what I'm saying, what I'm praising in front of my children. If I'm praising blue eyes or something, like maybe that will make my children want to have blue eyes.
And don't we do that? Like, oh, well, I want to look a certain way and I'm doing this to achieve this aesthetic. But also just the fact that I feel like when we talk about anything in front of our kids, we have to watch what we say about people's home lives. Or like, oh,
Mhm.
well, her family.
Yeah.
Oh, like, I don't know. We have those things where it's like, oh, she's got a rough home life. And it's just like, why don't we say that with more love? Like, oh, that poor thing. Like, what can we do? And sometimes there's nothing we can do within our realm of power. Sometimes that's the case. But when we speak of it, can we speak of it with more love and empathy?
Yeah.
Humanity, with more humanization of the situation. Something that Toni Morrison said that was really great was that in talking, it was like a 2004 interview. I'll find it and we'll post it in the thing. But she talked about how the way she wrote it was really tricky because she didn't want to use race-specific language, but she did also want to use race-specific language. She wanted it to be race-specific, but also race-free. So she tried to make sure that the dialogue and even the words she used could be understood by everyone, but also point directly to the American Black community, which I don't even know how someone contextualizes how to write an entire novel that is specific yet also not. It's just brilliant. But her goal was to make it free of racial hierarchy and triumphalism. And one of her quotes is, "The novel tried to hit the raw nerve of racial self-contempt, expose it, then soothe it, not with narcotics, but with language that replicated the agency I discovered in my first experience of beauty. Because that moment was so racially infused, the struggle was for writing that was indisputably Black." So the goal was to be able to talk about these issues, make it beautiful so that people could experience beauty while they're reading it. And especially if you are a Black reader, she wanted it to be for you, but also you wanted to experience your Blackness in a more intensely beautiful way that gives you agency. And this was her first novel. I can't even, like, that level of intentionality with her writing and the words she used. Camille, you talked about her prose a lot, about like how just beautiful it was and how it hits you. Like, what we're talking about is her mastery of writing. It's so smart. And then another fact is that this book had been in her mind for like years. She remembered in grade school when another girl had told her that she really wanted to have blue eyes. And Toni thought that was the silliest thing she'd ever heard in her life. And ever since that moment, Morrison had thought about it and wanted to write about what it'd be like to have a Black girl want to have blue eyes so badly. What institutions have to be working to have penetrated a child that young to think that blue eyes were the standard of beauty? What aspects would have to be doing that? And what you guys brought up about just being cognizant of how you're raising your child is like, it's overwhelming because I feel like we have so many contexts around us that are like interfering with any intentionality we have in trying to, even like my own body image. I don't know how to fight like every single, I just feel like every day, where do you guys find hope in all of this?
You got me off of Instagram, and I think that's the best thing I ever did. Nicole did for Lent. Nicole gave up Instagram and I joined her. And honestly, when Lent was over, I didn't want to go back. I was like, I'm done. And I haven't been back. And honestly, I have felt better about myself this past, now it's been a while. Now it's been more than like 6 months. I felt better about myself than I ever have. And I think that was huge, was just removing those voices that are unnecessary, removing voices that are speaking falsely. And I didn't need it. That I don't care if they think I'm pretty. I care that my kids and my husband and we all think we're wonderful, not beautiful, but we just love life. And I don't know. I just think removing unnecessary noise nowadays is more important than ever, because we're still going to get it. I mean, we're still going to hear, we're still going to see, but if we can remove what's unnecessary or what's not intentionally brought into our homes, I think it's a lot easier. It doesn't change things. I mean, we've all been conditioned like that. But then we're watching the Olympics right now, and I'm watching these gymnasts, and I'm like, oh, like, I think to expose ourselves to other people that like these 5 foot tall powerhouses, I'm like, oh, it's not so bad being so little, right? So maybe being more selective to the things we watch, things we expose ourselves and our children to, and being a lot more selective about what we bring into our own lives every day.
Yeah.
So I think that's, it's hard and it takes a lot of conscious effort, but I think that does help.
It is a lot of conscious effort. I just read this one book called This Is So Awkward. And it's a book about parenting in the modern age of puberty. Because puberty now is starting way younger, 6 or 7 years old. And because of that, puberty is lasting longer.
Okay, yes.
But and they don't really describe like why, because they're like, not a lot of the research has gone into why it's starting earlier, but we're gonna help you walk through how to talk about puberty and how not to talk about puberty. And a lot of it was, hey parents, figure out your own crap. Don't bring it in to conversations with your children. You know? And like and the part that struck me was like the body image chapter, just like about how the body grows during puberty. And the way the authors put it was like pretty jarring, because they're like, because of how we've been raised in American culture to like prioritize being skinny over not, you will most likely be disgusted by your child's body. And like the way that they wrote that is like, oh, and because of that, you need to figure out how to deal with it now and how not to let your disgust show in any way while their body is going through all these changes. And that means talking with another adult, talking with a therapist, talking to anyone else except your child about it.
Yeah.
And looking at the Bluest eye, Piccola is hearing all these adults talk about her body in a way that is sending messages to her. Or she's noticing how community members are treating, or like even boys that are teasing her, how they're treating a lighter skinned girl a lot nicer than they're treating her. So her conclusion is, oh, if I had lighter skin, these boys would have been nicer to me.
Yeah.
I think I've noticed in my own home with my 8-year-old daughter, I try not to talk about her at all in front of her unless it's praise or positive. And that's been huge, because I've seen so many other kids where they're like, well, my mom said this about me. And she's like, and I remember one time my mom said that I was going through something, or like, oh, Camille's going through it. It was like, it wasn't a bad comment. I was having a rough day, but just like the idea that she's like exposing my truths to somebody else, and just to not have my daughter catching me looking at my body in the mirror with a negative expression on my face, right? There's just these little things that I'm like, man, we've got to get our act together to raise these children and teach them and model for them kindness to everyone, despite looks or anything.
I think before we get into the why it was banned, which I'm sure we can all guess why, but we'll get into that. But before we get into that, I'd like to talk a little bit about some actionable items for people who have read this book or don't want to read this book. But what can we do on these different layers of what Toni Morrison is saying to have this book make an imprint in our communities and in ourselves? What you guys were talking about with just being intentional about what you are viewing and what you're talking about with your kids. I also think being intentional about what we're taking out and what we're bringing in. I think when I started watching more shows and more movies that were made by Black creators and creatives, my ideals of beauty changed a lot, because I saw different versions of beauty. I saw different people. I wasn't just exposed to the OC people over and over and over again. And that has changed also just how I, as a white middle-class person, view people. I don't see as many differences anymore because I'm more exposed, because I'm choosing to do that. I've been like just so charmed and amazed and like so in awe of how you have exposed your children and made sure that they are comfortable within various different cultural backgrounds in different countries, with different people who have different religions or different languages even. They're very comfortable with lots of different food too. Like they're not going to be like, ooh, I've never seen that from them. And I think that has been so intentional on your part to make sure that they see humanity in all the faces of this world. And I just think that's so incredible. So actionable items, also supporting bills that protect everyone's rights, that allow Black women to wear their hair however they want to wear it in businesses or in public. The Crown Act is one. So I don't know. There's a lot of actionable things that, as a listener, I would like you to think about. How am I going to improve these and change these standards of beauty in my own sphere? What do I have power to do? I can delete Instagram. I can support the Crown Act. I can donate to Black-owned businesses. I can watch Blackish, even. It's such a simple lift, just to be exposed to different faces and different hair and different cultural identities.
And to be honest, there's sometimes that I don't know what's appropriate. And I think being humble enough to be corrected is great. I am so bad at certain things. Like, I really am. And I'm bad at a lot of things. Like, even just my vocabulary is limited and I get corrections. And it's okay.
Oh, you're wonderful.
As long as I can say, oh, thanks. I didn't know. And to be able to say, I didn't know and move forward and be better. Great. And I think to allow that vulnerability is really great in becoming better people. I think I watched Fresh Off the Boat, Blackish, all these shows that I enjoyed them as shows a lot. But I did benefit also just from the idea of like, oh, I could relate to that. I could relate to this. I didn't understand that. I didn't know that was an experience that people had in these contexts. There's a lot to be learned and gained. And like you said, the resources we have now are fabulous. There's so many remarkable creators that are just brilliant. I mean, brilliant. And to support them is not hard. We're lucky to be able to support them. And then on top of that, children's books. There are so many amazing children's books. So many. My daughter recently got a book called The Eyes That Kiss in the Corner. I think it's what it's called. Correct me if I'm wrong. But it's the sweetest book. And we went to Japan and to have these conversations about how a lot of the women in Japan had bangs like she did, and she loved that. And to find this commonality, she's like, they have bangs like me. She's like, their eyes are a little different, but their skin is different too. But they wear a lot of sunscreen because they don't want to get darker. And I was like, yeah, just like to have these conversations and to not be like, oh, that's inappropriate. We're not going to talk about it. It's like, no, these are real things. Let's have these talks. And sometimes they are uncomfortable, but have the uncomfortable conversation of like, yeah, why do you think that kid was treated that way? Why do you think the other kids did that? Is that appropriate? Why do you think that's not appropriate? How should we treat people in this context? We often do this in our social situations. We'll get in the car after an event and we'll say, that was interesting. What did you notice about that? What did you notice about how that kid was treated? What did you notice about how those parents talked to their kids? What did you notice about how that kid reacted? And we just have them kind of have these moments of observation to discuss and say, is that what we feel is appropriate? Is that what we feel is good? How did that make you feel? And let them drive these conversations that aren't then uncomfortable. They're different. I don't think a lot of people think to have those conversations, but they're intentional and the takeaways are huge. And kids are brilliant. So I think being vulnerable, being teachable, humble, but also finding those opportunities. We just have to make the effort to say, I want my kids to see that not everyone is like us. What a good thing, especially in a country that is so right now in the throes of democracy, this battle for democracy. Let's show that being different is great. Having multiple opinions and voices and clothing style, even just traditions, culture, all of that is good. That is what we want if we can find the beauty in it. But we need to show them that beauty, because otherwise, if we isolate ourselves and them, it's going to be a lot harder to prove to somebody in their 50s that something other than what they know is beautiful. It's just a lot easier to teach children that. So do that now.
I know you were talking about humility just now, of just being humble and everything. But let me get you back on your high horse, Camille, because did you know you're on the Bluest Eye Wikipedia page?
Am I really?
What?
Yeah. Because I'm reading, because I'm pulling it up because because we do that for every episode and we look up reasons why it was banned. And this was banned in many, many places, but under the Littleton, Colorado section, mid to last half of the paragraph, Students protested the ban by reading passages from the book in their school libraries. In response to the ban, Camille Corin, a student attending the sit-in, acknowledged, quote, "Students hear about rape and incest in the news media. It's better to learn about those subjects from a Nobel Prize winner and to discuss it with a teacher in class." Ultimately, the book was reinstated.
We won.
Yeah.
Very Newsies-esque
real
victory.
life, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Eden, do you have other thoughts in addition to this? Because I have a little update about the banning.
Oh, yeah. I'm just in awe that this was her first novel.
Yeah, right?
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Brilliance.
Just
yeah.
So brilliant.
She's incredible.
Anyway.
And she was a
She
single
is.
mom while she was writing it and working full-time at a publisher house. Yeah. A little update about that's been in the news lately is this book has been at the center of a news in Texas where police officers went undercover and went into school libraries and took pictures of contested books, challenged books, and they'd spent a year-long process of trying to take these teachers and librarians to court as adults giving like pornographic materials to children and labeling them as sex offenders, and they would have to go to jail under Texan law. But the Human Rights Coalition, the ALA, and the civil liberties lawyers that have been working with these teachers are like, this is so ridiculous because this doesn't constitute that definition of pornography, according to Texas. Also, this is a huge overreach of the police. Like, why are they spending money and time doing this? There's so many things. The Bluest Eye is one of those books that is still causing outrage. And it's a really interesting story, and we will keep you updated on it, but nothing has really been finalized. The case hasn't been thrown out yet. These librarians might go to prison.
Jail let's put those resources somewhere else, like mental health.
Yeah.
Like, let's put that somewhere better than librarians.
Literally, the video is a policeman taking pictures of passages in the book, like clearly not reading the book, but just taking pictures of
out
paragraphs.
Of context. Yeah.
Out of context, completely ridiculous. So that's interesting and fun.
It's very Fahrenheit 451 too.
It's very Fahrenheit 451 that we're using police officers to, I don't know. It's really scary. So there's that. And there's also video, we can link it. The police officers like talking to librarians and teachers and being like, we just need you to participate with us. And the teachers and librarians are like, what on earth is happening? So, and also there's a solution. If you as a parent don't feel comfortable with your child reading that book, you're welcome to talk to your teacher. Almost every teacher out there, I'm not going to say everyone because I haven't spoken to every single teacher, but it is a very common practice for teachers to make allowances for specific families to do what they feel is comfortable in that family. Often they will offer a different book for that child to read instead and do kind of an independent study. That is often an option that is, it's commonly used.
And that's
so
okay.
It's not like you don't have an option.
We lived in Portland, Oregon, and they taught something at an age that I didn't feel was appropriate based on my understanding. And I was like, you know what? We're just going to opt out this year and we'll do it next year. That's okay. But you don't need to make that choice for everyone else. And I think that's the lesson, right? Yeah. Is you can do that. And what a wonderful privilege it is that you can do that. Don't do it for anyone else.
Absolutely.
They're only for your kids.
Yeah.
Definitely. Wonderful. Camille, that was so wonderful.
Yeah. That was
Thanks for having me.
A treat. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you both. Appreciate it all.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Love you.
See ya. Last comment for our comment corner. So we're going to need some of you people to leave comments, you listeners. I see there are 23 ratings, but there aren't that many comments. This is our last one. Actually, no. Second to last one. Sorry. So yeah, please again, leave a 5-star rating. That will help us stay on the air. And this one comes from Greg. My spouse. And he titled it, really Why has no one made this before? What if he gave us 1 star?
He was like, Eden, we're still in a fight.
Yeah.
Crazy. For a small business.
He gave us 5 stars and it says, why has
Yay.
no one made this before? What a good, important idea for a podcast. The hosts have such a fun dynamic too. Greg, thank you.
Thank you. You have a fun dynamic.
Thank you for
and
listening.
Eden do, Greg.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah.
I love that.
Listen,
perfect.
subscribe, download. All
Yeah.
right. It was good
Reach
seeing
out
you,
to us
Nicole.
with any questions. Good to see you, Eden. I'm going to let you know how it goes, my meeting. Also, I'm just going to say I love you. Then I talk about things that aren't podcast related. Okay, love you too.
Okay.
Love you 3. Okay.
Love you.
Now I'm going to talk about
stuff. Burn This Book is produced by us, Nicola Corin and Eden Wen.
Music by myself, Nicole, and performed by my dad, Frank.